Okay, so we're going to look at the second lesson. I'm going to try to make this brief, but you definitely should watch this before you go into the wiki and probably before you write about the Rauschenberg. Um, this will also kind of inform your journal object assignment. So this is a piece from 1917 by Marcel Duchamp, and it's called Fountain. And it's a ready-made. And in some ways, we have to go all the way back to Duchamp to start to activate um, the way we read an object, the way artists began to look at what was possible for art. There was a lot of experimentation with the Dadaists, and Dada is a big owes itself a big debt to Duchamp, who was a part of that. And I think they were all working to break up what was considered art at the time. And it's just a little foreground, which will make more sense. So Duchamp says, I was interested in ideas, not merely in visual products. And that an ordinary object, right, this urinal, could be elevated to the dignity of a work of art by the mere choice of an artist. Moving forward, we're going to be looking at some things that will really challenge whether we believe that's true or not. But that's a lot of fun. Duchamp believed in artwork that was in service to the mind rather than just retinal art that was pleasing to the eye. And that's a great expression to be able to talk about the shift. This would be a great example, Claude Monet's Haystacks. This is retinal, what the eye might perceive. And this, by Duchamp, this bicycle wheel, right? It's not quite a ready-made. It's more like a assisted ready-made. This is a ready-made in that he just got the urinal that was fabricated, and he signed it R. Mutt, and his piece was done. In that sense, it's a ready-made. It's the object as it were. This would be an assisted ready-made in that he took two objects, as it were, and put them together. This is a later Duchamp piece. My pronunciation in French would not be great, but it's basically, it's a box in a valise. So it's a box in a suitcase. And what he did here, which is really, I think, quite interesting, is he made all these little miniature reproductions of his work and made an edition of this. So you would open up this little Duchamp suitcase and get all kinds of reproductions of his work. So he's shifting from ready-mades to sort of reproductions. And he's addressing the commodification of art. He's looking at how commerce is shifting, the advertising is beginning. And it's a portable museum. And it's like a salesman who's selling his or her wares. I also think something to consider, right? This is 1941. Massive war in Europe and World War II, and every artist is affected. The artworks themselves are being affected and being moved out of museums and private collections to keep them safe from the Nazi kind of spread, which was both a spread for power, but also for the acquisition of artworks. That was a prime agenda of the Third Reich. And so seeing that, Duchamp comes to the United States, but he also makes this kind of miniature packed up version of art. And I think it speaks to the time as well. He also is acknowledging commercial galleries and sort of the artistic production as a commodity, right? And not something that's just pleasing to look at. He's recognizing its commodification. All right. I'm going to shift now to America, right? That's Duchamp, and it foregrounds a lot of things that are happening. the musician John Cage um, was at Black Mountain College. The same time, Robert Rauschenberg was there, and a few other artists. And um, this piece, 4 minutes, 4 minutes 33 seconds, and you can see this is the score. And I'll include a little um, video for you to look at if you want on the resource page. It's a piece that's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. And so we begin to start questioning, and Robert Rauschenberg at the time was making kind of white paintings and white on white compositions that Robert Ryman ends up, pursuing um, for his kind of career. But the artworks are less as kind of agents and more as passive receptors, which begins to question how the viewer um, is active in the construction of artwork and where we seek meaning. Do we seek meaning from the artwork itself or in our own relationship to it? So this is a shift, and it was happening at Black Mountain College. It's really was crucial to Merce Cunningham, the dancer, was there as well, and the idea of play becomes central to some of the artists moving forward. This is a Rauschenberg piece called Bed, and another thing to think about, right? This is really close to pre-pop. The 1950s, United States. We just kind of liberated Europe from Hitler, defeated the Japanese, and this kind of American identity was being put to the test in the government. There was under McCarthy, Senator McCarthy, there was a question about who was truly American, and it's called the Red Scare. I think this is the second Red Scare. There was an earlier one, but this idea that if you belong to a communist party, you would be kicked out of government, you could be arrested. As it were, many people who were homosexual in the government were lost their jobs, and it was a really scary time. There were blacklists within the entertainment community, and so this piece is very interesting. Rauschenberg's sexuality, he never really talked about it publicly, but he was homosexual. He had relations with Jasper Johns as well as Cy Twombly, and this piece is called Bed, and in a lot of ways, it's this combination of kind of breaking this notion of a kind of American masculinity coming after the abstract expressionists. We can see the handicraft, the quilt. It's an actual kind of more of the feminine world, and then more of the abstract expressionists, very kind of gestural and almost violent, painterly quality above. It also sets the tone for Rauschenberg's work, where he's kind of like creates a flat bed or a work surface, and he makes combines, things that like end up being acquired. This is a piece here that he asked de Kooning, right, who did this piece, Woman One, who was very much abstract expressionist and very macho, right? He asked de Kooning for a drawing and erased it. And he was really interested, Rauschenberg was, in exploring what are the limits of what an artwork could be. And so could an erased drawing be a work of art? And in fact, he decides on it, and it is so, and the framing of it and the labeling of it is important. but it's also a way of challenging the status quo at the time, and it probably was one question is, what kind of protest might it have been in relationship to the abstract expressionist work? This is a piece by Jasper Johns, um, and we have Target with um, you know um, these body parts here. It's the title's Target with plaster casts, and this idea of being like these parts being hidden and things in targeted, and this idea of a red background. We could read into the McCarthyism of the time. But where Johns is really interesting, and I think begins to, perhaps more than anything, allow us to look at the pop artists to come as owing a huge debt. And if you can look closely, the encaustic, and here encaustic, which is wax, is holding bits of newspaper, right, in these stripes there. And in some ways, you could say it's screening out or filtering out or making certain things opaque that are embedded in the flag. Um, but one of the things that is interesting is by using um, something like a flag, a two-dimensional kind of sign, right, is that it hovers somewhere, right, between physical, right, this physical flag, and conceptual states, right? It's between the physical and the conceptual. And in that sense, John's kind of talked about his work as being homeless, this idea that where does it reside? And he was very interested in things that the mind already knows. So try to remember that expression, things that the mind already knows.